sometimes it's as simple as that. I was lucky enough to meet up with one of the people who's been supported by Mind to Mind, and had a chat with him. His name's Tommy, and well, first of all,
Tom and Tommy.
I know I did say this to him.
Amazing.
We'll talk about this after the interview, but I did say yeah, Tom and Tommy. That's a great lineup. We had a wee chat last week. In preparation for today's interview that we're going to put out, just to chat about mental health in general and about the support that is available through the Mind to Mind website. So after I said hello and after we got over our names, I asked Tommy to tell us about his experience with his own mental health.
My experience with mental health, obviously, is I used to have an eating disorder, anorexia and bulimia, that started when I was age 17. I was actually a semi-professional footballer, and my mum had suffered long-term cancers right from my birth right through to the age of 17. And I was kind of going back and forward to the doctor after losing my mum and my grandfather and telling them that I was cutting down on my food and was really exercising a lot. But back in 1997, you never really heard anything about eating disorders. It was really, really difficult to kind of, like, even I didn't understand what an eating disorder was. And the doctor just kind of giving me like antidepressants, sending me away and saying come back and see me for 3 months. So that's went on for about 3 years, and I went away to visit my family in Australia, and they've actually had eating disorders over there as well. And during that time I ended up taking ill over there, and I come back, and then shortly after I ended up suffering a massive heart attack, and I was in a coma for 4 months, and that's when I was actually diagnosed as having an eating disorder. And through that I lost my footballing career. I had sciatic nerve damage, and I ended up getting back out of the hospital, and I had kind of periods I never really getting better, but I did get better after that, and I ended up meeting what was soon to become my wife, and she suffered 4 miscarriages, which was misdiagnosed as polycystic ovarian syndrome. Turned out it was actually ovarian cancer. She had a full hysterectomy, and that was where I had a second relapse. Never really get better again due to that, because my dad had suffered type 1 diabetes and ended up having an amputation below his left knee, and suffered a massive stroke, which we ended up losing him in 2014. And that's really when things turned for me, because at that point I decided something that my dad had always said to me was, don't do it for me, don't do it for your wife, you've got to want to do it for yourself. And I kind of became sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I've now been recovered for well over 10 years, but it's been a long journey basically to get to where I am.
You mentioned there the GP and that initial contact. Was there any other organisation or any other sources of help that you've reached out to at that time?
Actually, I get put in touch with a great community disorder eating team that came in and visited me. So that was basically support in the community and in the hospital. But it was never really anything that you would call therapy. It was mostly like just me speaking to them on the phone and getting in there and getting weighed and things like that. They never really gave me any therapy. Actually, the only therapy I did get was after I was discharged from eating disorder service in 2019. I actually met a community link-up worker in my GP service, and they put me in touch with a psychologist who they ended up having me sit down, and it was basically like grief counselling kind of thing. And that was probably the biggest thing that really helped me, because it's something that I'd always asked for and never really get help.
So much was going on at once. You've had your eating disorder, you've experienced bereavement, you've experienced difficulties with your family as well. Did it just sort of feel like there was a point where everything was just all piling up on top of each other and becoming so much to try and deal with at once?
Absolutely, yeah. It was kind of like I was trying to explain to them that I was obviously struggling with the grief and obviously my wife's situation and things like that. And I think for me, the eating disorder became like an escape from everything, to be honest. Like, it was kind of like a safety blanket, and as sad as this is to say today, it kind of became my best friend, because it stopped me recovering, because I thought, who am I going to be without eating disorder? And I was scared that if I did recover, I would have to face everything like you say that was going on in my life. I would have to take that all on, which I think it was just an escape really, and a coping mechanism in general really.
So what about Mind to Mind? When did Mind to Mind come into your life, and how did you find out about it?
Mind to Mind came into my life probably about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was through See Me Scotland, who I've actually been a volunteer with for over 10 years. I'd done a lot of work with them, and they kind of put me onto them and things, and I'd done things like obviously talking about the grief side of things and coping with stress and videos and that for them. And I think they were really, really good, because when I looked at some of the things that they were doing, I think to myself, if I had that back then, how to deal with kind of the coping mechanisms, how to deal with stress and things, there was that kind of resource back then that might have been influential in helping me not have that long journey and try to recover that at that time.
Tell us about what Mind to Mind is, and that what does Mind to Mind offer? What's available on Mind to Mind?
Yeah, well, they hold a lot of different things, but obviously, like, kind of the digital things, like obviously coping mechanisms and how to deal with stress, how to deal with grief. That's the kind of the things that I've kind of really got involved with, I would say.
We know everybody's going to be different, and everyone has different things that will work for them. But when things have got difficult, what kind of strategies have you found have worked for you personally?
For me personally, it's been things like journaling and things like that, because a lot of the things that I've kind of bottled up that I couldn't speak to people about, I find it really, really good that I could put it down in paper and it kind of takes that hold over it and things. But on top of that, things like breathing exercises I think was really, really good. That was something that Mind to Mind that obviously recommended that I really started to kind of utilise in my own recovery. And meditation and things like that, that was really good for me as well. But I think as well, just kind of try to speak to people. I think that's the biggest part, whether that's a family member or a friend or anything like that, because I think these things thrive in secrecy, and a big part of recovering and trying to kind of manage things and maintain your mental health is speaking about it.
Specifically talking about speaking about it, how do you feel about, coming to speak about your mental health publicly? Talking to a stranger like me or talking on the radio. Do you feel apprehensive, or has talking about it in this way started to help you? Is it a good strategy?
Yeah, I initially at the very, very start, over 10 years ago when I started speaking about this, I was really, really apprehensive because especially when you suffer with an eating disorder and things like that, it's seen as a female illness generally, which actually it isn't. It's actually, they say it's 1 in 4 men, but I think it's like 50-50 across the gender divide really. But I think it's really, really difficult to speak about it. But now for me, I think it's more of a case that it's not just for helping me, it's really, I think about it and speaking to people that it's maybe going to help somebody else that's not going to go through the same journey and the same struggle that I did. And if it can help one person, I think that's really influential, because the earlier you can accept you've got a problem and the earlier you can get the help, the more likely you are to have a healthy, sustained recovery as well. Do
you find it quite cathartic to be able to speak about it to people, and maybe you see them take it on board, relate to what you say, and that they're saying to themselves, I can see some of myself in Tommy here, and that leads them to maybe start their own path for recovery? Does that help you? Does that make you feel better as well?
Absolutely. It's very, very cathartic. Like I say, it's a term that you're helping somebody else, but it's also helping you, because everything you've kind of hold on to, you're then letting it go and you're speaking about it. And I think that's a big part of the process, actually recovering for these type of things and getting over that.
Look, of course, it's difficult to maintain that level that you're at just now. There's going to be times when maybe challenges get thrown at us in life. And if someone's already going through some difficulties in their mental health, they're in recovery, but they find that they have these wee dips. Have you found that that's happened? And what strategies have you been able to use to get yourself back up to that good place again?
Yeah, well, especially now, I kind of notice the triggers and things that I've got, like, obviously, like, times get really difficult when my wife's health and things like that, and I've kind of noticed that sometimes the bad voices kind of sneak back in and things like that, but I recognise them now and I automatically kick them back out, because I know that the eating disorder was never a choice, but if I let that creep back in now, that is me letting it back in. So I try to manage things by, like, one, celebrating the lives of my mum and dad and things like their anniversaries, and their birth and things, and Mother's Day and Father's Day and things like that. That's kind of things that really helps me a lot.
If you go into the world of what if here, if you could go back and tell your younger self, Tommy from 10 or 20 years ago, and give them one piece of advice, what would that be?
I think it would be that you're really worth it, and you don't need to think that you're weak by opening up about your struggles, because it's actually a strength. And I think that's the biggest thing that I would like to say to that person, because, like, I think if he'd opened up and spoke about things and accepted I had a problem and no maybe pushed people away when they actually tried to help him, even though it was the illness itself, I think that would have been really great. And yeah, it's a difficult one to kind of put into words, but I think that's the thing, that you're not weak speaking up about things, because I think men in general in Scotland, we think that speaking about our mental health is a weakness, when it's actually a strength, actually, to open up about things.
No, I couldn't agree more. We're rotten at it, aren't we? Without a doubt, we're all really bad at it. And it's something that when we speak about mental health and well-being, certainly myself, when I'm talking on the radio and being a bit more honest about it, hopefully, and that's just trying to break down a couple more barriers, one or two maybe, where we can just get people talking about how they're feeling. And it can be the simplest thing about just saying to somebody, let's just have a chat, let's meet up for a coffee. You know, it doesn't have to be a massive step to support someone, does it?
No, I always say to people, it's just about being there for them. It's about validating their feelings. You don't be non-judgmental. You don't need to give them answers. But the one thing I always say to people, like when they're thinking of somebody that's maybe struggling, whether it's a family member or a friend, if they say they're okay, ask them that again, because sometimes you'll always like naturally say, I am fine and things like that. Ask it again and reaffirm that, because that might be them. They might open up then eventually as well.
Now, going back to earlier on, Tommy, you mentioned your eating disorder, and it's something we've spoken about here on Highland Hospital Radio before. We've been fortunate enough to have a local support group come in and speak to us. And one of the things that it's really good to point out with regards to the eating disorder is that it affects everyone. Maybe we don't quite associate it with being something that men could be impacted by, but it's really important to highlight and talk about it and say that, well, you know, actually it affects everyone, doesn't it?
I think I absolutely agree with that, because like I think especially with men with eating disorders, like celebrities, like I've spoken with Freddie Flintoff and obviously his eating disorder, Paul Gascoigne, Christopher Eccleston and things like that. People that these guys, like everybody looks at them and think they've got all this money, they've got this great life. For them to open up about things, I think that lets your general person know that if they guys can speak about it, surely it opens barriers, if you know what I mean. Yeah,
it lets us know that mental health conditions or disorders and so much else, it affects everyone. You know, it doesn't target one particular group of people. It's widespread throughout our whole community, isn't it?
Absolutely. Everybody's got mental health, and I think that's something that's really, really important to understand, that we've all got it. And I think especially during lockdown, people kind of became more understanding of things like depression and things, and been locked up in their houses and things, and that mental health was really rife then, and people kind of think maybe it gave them a better understanding of how if people were actually struggling back then.
So the resources for Mind to Mind, it's on the website. If you feel comfortable enough and confident enough, get yourself onto the website. And what you're going to find there is other people's experiences, isn't it? And hopefully it's something that you can relate to. And if you feel comfortable with, you can take it forward and reach out for more support and look for further help, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just go onto the Mind to Mind website. You can get through all the different resources. Like we've got things talking about dealing with grief, dealing with stress, all different type of illnesses to improve mental health. And I think it's really important to go on there. You might take something away from it, and it may help you or somebody that you're actually a loved one, a friend, or anything like that as well.
Yeah, and that website to go and look at is nhsinform.scot/mind to mind. And if you want, you can go onto our own website, hhr.scot, where we will have that information there. So if you haven't got a notepad or whatever to write it down, you can get onto our website and we'll direct you to it as well. Tommy, thank you so much for coming on to the station today and having a chat with us. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure it's been of great benefit to everybody. So thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.